Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. And also, the Search for the Ancient Bauble Kickstarter has launched, so make sure you go check that out. The Kickstarter campaign will last for 30 days, and after that, the playmat will no longer be available for purchase. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in for the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So, because of some of my, let's just say, off-the-wall builds, some of you have given me the nickname the Mad Lad. And I actually really like that nickname, so thank you. And on today's episode, I've got a brand new Mad Lad deck for you. One of my favorite things is finding a commander that many players like to take in one direction and finding another unique way to take it on my own. As I mentioned earlier, I love unexpected and off-the-wall builds. And this one very well might just be my most Mad Lad deck that I've ever built. So, who's the commander for this deck and in what direction are we taking it? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So the commander for this Mad Lad deck is the King of Tribal itself, Morophon the Boundless. Morophon is a 6/6 shapeshifter with changeling that costs 7. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type, and spells of the chosen type you cast cost Wooburg less to cast. This effect reduces only the amount of colored mana you pay. Other creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. So, like I mentioned earlier, Morophon is known by many as the King of Tribal decks. Essentially, you can pick whatever tribe you want and build a tribal deck around Morophon. Morophon gives you access to all 5 colors, he reduces the cost of your creatures, and he also pumps your creatures too. So for certain tribes, if there isn't a good commander out there, or one that gives you access to 5 colors, you can use Morophon as your commander and it still works. Because of the tribal versatility of Morophon, it is an incredibly popular commander. In fact, according to EDH Rec, it is the 21st most popular commander out there. So with this Mad Lad deck, you might be thinking, okay Mitch, well what tribe are you gonna pick to build around Morophon? Well, the answer to that is no tribe. That's right, I'm building a tribeless Morophon deck. There are all types of creatures in this deck that come from many different tribes. Now, why would I do that? Well, let's talk about some of the cards to find out. So the initial idea for this deck came with the interaction between Shrieking Drake and Morophon. Shrieking Drake is a simple 1/1 flying drake for a blue. Its Oracle text reads, when it enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. So Shrieking Drake can actually bounce itself back to your hand. Now, normally that would cost you a blue mana to do every single time. But if you put Morophon in play first and you choose Drakes, well, Shrieking Drake is going to cost blue less to cast. So you can cast Shrieking Drake for free, bounce it back to your hand, cast it for free again, bounce it back to your hand, and so on and so forth. You can do this as many times as you want, and there's a lot of broken things that you can do with all those ETBs. Now, of course, I didn't just build a deck around one singular card, so I looked far and wide to try to find all of these similar cards to this one. Essentially creatures that could not only return themselves back to your hand, but also have their mana cost reduced to 0 thanks to Morophon. Now again, Morophon lets you pick and choose what tribe you want when you cast it. So as long as you don't cast Morophon until you know which of these cards you have in your hand, you can pick and choose whichever tribe you need. So some other fantastic Shrieking Drake options that I found are cards like Cavern Harpy, Horn Kavu, and Hibernation Sliver. Cavern Harpy is a 2/1 Harpy beast with flying that costs blue-black. When it enters the battlefield, you return a blue or black creature you control to its owner's hand, and you can pay 1 life to return it back to its owner's hand. So thankfully, Cavern Harpy is blue and black, so you can just use its ETB to return itself back to your hand. So you cast Morophon, you choose either Harpy or Beast, again because of its Oracle text, and then its cost is reduced by blue-black, so it's free. And then Horn Kavu is very similar, but it costs red-green, and it's going to return a red or green creature you control back to its owner's hand. So in this case, you would cast Morophon and choose Kavu. And then Hibernation Sliver is somewhat similar, yet different. It's a 2/2 sliver that costs blue-black, and it says all slivers have pay 2 life, return this permanent to its owner's hand. So this one, like the others, you can just keep bouncing back to your hand, but you've got to pay 2 life each time. So you are restricted based on the amount of life that you have. Though in a bit we'll talk about some cards that we can use this to dig deeper into our deck to get actual other pieces that can help us win the game. And actually keep in mind that this one can also really help us out with Morophon. Since Morophon is a changeling, we can use that pay 2 life to return Morophon back to our hand because it's technically a sliver. Now another one that works in a different way is Grinning Ignis. Grinning Ignis is a 2/2 elemental for 2 and a red. It has pay a red, return Grinning Ignis to its owner's hand, add colorless red, activate only as a sorcery. Basically, you pay a red to get its mana cost back, and then it goes back to your hand. So you get Morophon in play, and you choose Elemental. Now instead of costing 2 and a red, it costs 2. You do need to pay that first red to bring it back to your hand, but then at that point, you can essentially do this as many times as you want. It's going to give you colorless, and red, so you can use that 2 colorless on the generic cost. So you cast it for the 2, it comes back into play, and then you use that red that you also got from it to bounce it back to your hand and get colorless red again. So again, after that first time, its ability essentially pays for itself and you can cast it an infinite number of times. Now, casting these over and over again infinitely is great, but it's not really getting us anywhere. We're kind of just spinning our wheels. So what's the end goal of this deck? What do we actually want with all these ETBs? Why are we casting these things over and over again? So let's talk about some other cards that helped inspire this deck, and to do that, let's talk about one of my previous Mad Lad decks. Back in March, I built a mono-green artifact storm deck because, yeah, that's a thing, around Nylea Keen-Eyed. Now, in the comments of that episode, many of you pointed out that that deck could have actually been called Nylea Monuments because it utilizes 4 of the 5 monuments. Now, that wasn't actually intentional that I utilized 4 of the 5, but they worked really well with the deck. However, for this one, I am utilizing all 5 because they work fantastically in this deck. So if you really want to, you can call this deck Morophon Monuments, or Morophon Tribalists, or whatever you want to call it. Regardless, I'm talking about the monuments from Amonkhet like Hazoret's Monument, Bantu's Monument, and Oketra's Monument. Hazoret's Monument says, red creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And then Bantu's Monument says, black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then Oketra's Monument says, white creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. So first off, each of these have fantastic ETB payoffs. Again, if we can infinitely cast one of our creatures, we can have as many triggers as we want of any of these that are in play. So Hazoret's Monument let us rummage as many times as we want. So essentially we can just keep digging through our deck to get to a win condition like Bantu's Monument, which is going to drain out all of our opponents and we win. Or if Oketra's Monument in play, we get an infinite number of tokens with vigilance. Okay, yes, rules lawyers out there, yes, technically you have to pick a number, so how about 1 trillion, okay? Now, these monuments are not just impactful because of their ETB trigger though. Their cost reduction is actually crucial in this deck as well, and we'll get to why here in a little bit. But before we do that, let's talk about the last 2 monuments with Ronus's Monument and Kefnet's Monument. Ronus's Monument says, green creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains trample until end of turn. So with infinite ETBs, we can essentially make any of our creatures infinitely large, and they've got trample. So if we just have 3 creatures to swing with, that's gonna be game over. And then Kefnet's Monument says, blue creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, target creature an opponent controls doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So we can utilize this early on to shut down our opponent's creatures, although yeah, it's not really going to be a finisher for us. Regardless, like I said, each of these can be useful not just for their ETB trigger, but also for their cost reduction. Because we're not just going to be depending on those first 5 creatures that we discussed that go infinite with Morophon. We're also going to be depending on some other creatures that need a little cost reduction help. I'm talking about some creatures like White Mane Lion, Core Skyfisher, and Dreamstalker. White Mane Lion is a 2/2 cat with flash that costs 1 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, return a creature you control to its owner's hand. So if we put Morophon in play and choose cat, this is just going to cost us 1 to cast. And if we've got, say, Oketra's Monument in play, now this costs us nothing to cast. So at instant speed, we can just cast this as many times as we need to. Now, of course, we've got other ways to reduce the cost, but we'll get to those here in a bit. So next up, let's talk about Core Skyfisher, a 2/3 core soldier with flying that costs 1 and a white, and when it comes into play, we return a permanent we control to its owner's hand. And then Dreamstalker is a 1/5 illusion for 1 and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. We've also got yet another lovely Drake with Silver Drake, a 3/3 Drake that costs 1 white blue. It has flying, and its Oracle text reads, when it enters the battlefield, return a white or blue creature you control to its owner's hand. So again, if we cast Morphon and choose Drake, and we've got either Oketra's or Kefnet's Monument in play, this is going to cost us nothing. And then there's Lava Zombie, a 4/3 zombie for 1 black-red. When it enters the battlefield, return a black or red creature you control to its owner's hand, and you can pay 2 to pump it, but we're not really going to do that. Next up, we've got another fast cat with flash with Fleetfoot Panther. It's a 3/4 cat for 1 green-white, and when it enters the battlefield, return a green or white creature you control to its owner's hand. So again, like White Mane Lion, this one can go infinite at instant speed. Now, as I mentioned before though, we are definitely not just counting on having the right monument in play to get rid of that generic mana cost, because we also have some other ways to reduce costs with things like Umori the Collector, Duskwatch Recruiter, and Mistform Warchief. Umori says when it enters the battlefield, you choose a card type, and spells you cast the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So when this comes into play, we obviously are going to choose Creature. So any of those creatures that we just talked about that have 1 generic mana in their cost, well, that generic cost now goes away. Duskwatch Recruiter can also help us out, or at least I should say its other side can help us out, because at the beginning of each upkeep, if no spells were cast last turn, we're going to transform it. And on the other side, we've got Kralin Horde Howler, which says creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So if we can flip this one at the right time, it can help us cast our creature infinitely. And then Mistform Warchief's Oracle text reads, creature spells you cast that share a creature type with Mistform Warchief cost 1 less to cast. Now, normally this would only help with illusions, which isn't all that great, but we can actually tap and it becomes the creature type of our choice until end of turn. And also, keep in mind that each of these can also reduce the cost of Morphon as well. But next up, let's talk about the Familiars, which are other fantastic cost reducers that can help us out with a lot of creatures, but not Morphon, unfortunately. Nightscape Familiar says blue spells and red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And then Sunscape Familiar does the exact same thing for green and blue spells, and Stormscape does the same for white and black spells. And then the last two are Thornscape Familiar and Thunderscape Familiar, which reduce the cost of red and white spells, and then black and green spells. And make sure you keep in mind that these can help us cast not only creature spells, but also reduce the cost for other spells as well. But when it comes to creature spell cost reduction, we've got some really big ones with Ezroot Channeler and Heartless Summoning. Ezroot Channeler says creature spells you cast cost X less to cast for X the amount of life you gain this turn. And we can tap it to gain 2 life. So at the very least, by tapping this, we reduce the cost of our creature spells by 2 in that turn. And then Heartless Summoning says creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast, and creatures you control get -1/-1. This might just be the best cost reducer in the entire deck, since we can get down early and it reduces the cost a ton. And while that -1/-1 might not be all that great, and you might be thinking, oh no, this is going to take out Shrieking Drake, well, thankfully Morphon also buffs too. So Morphon's Anthem essentially negates this, at least for the creature type that's chosen and for the combo piece that's going to be used. Next up, let's talk about Tangroot, which is not a cost reducer, but kind of works in the exact same way. Its Oracle text reads, whenever a player casts a creature spell, that player adds green. So even if we don't have a cost reducer in play, and we've got one of those generic mana creatures that we need to go infinite with, this can help us do that. Morphon's going to reduce their pips, and they still have a generic mana that we have to pay, but this is going to give us that mana back. And if we've already reduced their cost to 0, well now congratulations to us, we've got infinite green mana. Now, yes, this will help out our opponents, but it's definitely going to help us out a lot more than them. It can help us go infinite with a lot of our combo creatures and generate us infinite mana with other ones, or all of them if we're set up properly. Now, the best 2 creatures to go infinite with are actually slightly tougher than the other ones to actually do so, because those creatures are going to be Sawtooth Loon and Sparkcaster, which each have 2 generic mana in their cost. And who knew there's actually a loon in Magic? That's pretty cool. And if you don't live in Minnesota, you might not know what a loon is. But that's completely beside the point. Anyway, Sawtooth Loon is a 2/2 flying bird that costs 2 white-blue. Its Oracle text reads, when it enters the battlefield, return a white or blue creature you control to its owner's hand, and when it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on the bottom of your library. So if we can reduce its cost down to 0, we can essentially get that trigger as many times as we need. Like Hazoret's Monument, it's going to let us essentially dig through our entire deck to find the card that we need to win. Or, you know, if we can cast Sparkcaster over and over again, it's just going to be game over. It's a 5/3 combo for 2 red-green, and when it enters the battlefield, return a red or green creature you control to its owner's hand, and when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. So with, say, Morphon and Heartless Summoning in play, this is going to cost us 0, we can cast it an infinite number of times and ping all of our opponents down. So yeah, in this deck there are quite a few creatures that can go infinite, and there's quite a few ways to make them go infinite. And even with a card like Grinning Ignis, which starts off fantastic with Morphon, if we've got a cost reducer in play for it, it's even better. Because again, if on top of Morphon we've got yet another cost reducer in play for it, then we can essentially generate infinite colorless mana. So yeah, there's a lot of crazy things that we can do with this deck, and I'm nowhere near done talking about them just yet. So let's talk about some ways to draw an absurd amount of cards with things like Beast Whisperer, Primordial Sage, and Soul of the Harvest. Beast Whisperer says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Primordial Sage is very similar. It says whenever you cast a creature spell, you may draw a card. And Soul the Harvest says whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. Now, keep in mind that with Beast Whisperer, it is not a may. So therefore, you need to make sure that you don't just draw through your entire library and lose the game. That being said, each of these can be incredibly impactful in this deck. Obviously, if we already have the means to go infinite, we can just draw however many cards we need to find a win condition. But again, even if we're not quite set up to go infinite just yet, we can use these to help us dig for cards that can help us. Again, we've got a lot of creatures in this deck that can just bounce themselves back to our hand. So we cast them, we draw, we cast them, we draw, and so on and so forth. But in this deck, there's a card that's even better than these, and in fact, it is so good in my opinion that it is the Golden Pig of this deck. The Golden Pig is going to be the number 1 card out of our 99, and the Golden Pig for this deck is Tulane, Teller of Tales. Tulane is a 2/4 human druid with vigilance that costs 2 green, white, blue. He has whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, and pay 3 and tap return target creature you control to its owner's hand. So Tulane is of course an absurdly powerful commander, but also an absurdly powerful card in this deck. If we're set up to cast a creature infinitely, if we've got Tulane in play, well, we're just going to win. We can essentially draw through as much of our deck as we want, and we can keep putting lands from our hand into play. And those lands come into play untapped. So essentially, even if we're tapped out, Tulane gives us all the cards that we need and all the mana that we need to win. And although at that point we really don't need it because we've got other ways to bounce Tulane back to our hand so we don't mill ourselves, Tulane actually can just do that himself. We pay 3 and tap him, bounce him back to our hand, and then we are free to just go infinite with another one of our creatures and another way to win. And of course, Tulane can be incredibly impactful even without us comboing. If we've got Shrieking Drake in our hand and Tulane in play, we basically just pay 1 to ramp and also draw as many times as we can. So yeah, Tulane is absolutely insane in this kind of a deck, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. But some other great ways of taking advantage of our casts and ETBs are cards like Tome of the Guild Pack, Season of Growth, and Sunbird's Invocation. Tome of the Guild Pack says whenever you cast a multicolored spell, draw a card, and it can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So if we've got one of our multicolored bounce creatures, we can draw a ton of cards with this. And then Season of Growth says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. Now scrying isn't card advantage, but it is card selection. So again, this can help us dig through our deck to get to the right card that we need. And then Sunbird's Invocation helps us out in a different way. It says whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library where X that spell's mana value. You may cast a spell with mana value X or less from among cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, obviously this can help us out a lot throughout the game. Essentially, whenever we cast a spell, we've got a chance to essentially cast another spell at the top of our library for free. And if we're going infinite with essentially any other creature than Shrieking Drake, well, we're just going to be able to win from there. We've got some 2-mana finishers in this deck, so if we can keep casting a 2-mana creature over and over again, we're eventually going to get to them and cast them and win. But before we talk about those finishers, let's first talk about a few tutors with cards like Supply and Demand, Signal the Clans, and Weird Harvest. The demand side is what we really care about. It says search your library for a multicolored card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So even with that restriction, we've got a ton of options of combo pieces to go get. We can go get one of our free creatures like a Horned Kavu, or we can get a reducer like a Mori, or we can get to a finisher, which again I will talk about here in a bit. And then we've got Signal the Clans, which is an instant that says search your library for 3 creature cards and reveal them. If you reveal 3 cards with different names, choose one of them at random and put that card in your hand, shuffle the rest in your library. Again, we've got plenty of creatures that can combo, including 3 that just straight up combo with Morphon. Or at least I should say 3 that combo without any other hoops that we have to jump through. And keep in mind that this is at instant speed, so it can be a fantastic way for us to set ourselves up for our next turn to win. And finally, let's talk about Weird Harvest, which is a sorcery for X green green. Its Oracle text reads, each player may search their library for up to X creature cards, reveal those cards, put them into their hand, then shuffle. So although this does help our opponent's tutor as well, this can help us get whatever combo pieces we need. But now that we've talked about setting ourselves up for the combo, how exactly do we win? So let's first start off by talking about Impact Tremors and Warstorm Surge. Impact Tremors is an enchantment that says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, Impact Tremors deals 1 damage to each opponent. So again, if we're having a creature enter the battlefield an infinite number of times, this is going to ping each of our opponents an infinite number of times. Or again, rules lawyers out there, whatever their life total is. And then Warstorm Surge is somewhat similar. It says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So in a somewhat similar way, by our creature infinitely entering the battlefield, we ping down whatever we want an infinite number of times, including our opponent's life totals. And then another enchantment that can help us out but in a different way is Outpost Siege. When it enters the battlefield, we choose either Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans at the beginning of our upkeep, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. And if we chose Dragons, whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. So early on, if we need it for temporary card advantage, we can choose Khans. But if we need this for a finisher, of course we're going to be picking Dragons. And we even have a creature that can help us out as well in our combo with Corpse Knight. It says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So yeah, Corpse Knight can drain out all of our opponents and we win. And finally, of course, we can win with some Storm cards as well, such as Grape Shot and Tendrils of Agony. Grape Shot is going to deal 1 damage to any target and it's got Storm. So Storm means that when we cast this spell, we copy it for each spell cast before this turn and we can choose new targets for the copies. Again, when we're comboing off, we can cast our creature as many times as we need to, so yeah, infinite damage essentially. And then Tendrils of Agony says target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life and it's got Storm. So again, in a very similar way, this one just drains out all of our opponents and we win. Obviously, there are plenty of ways for us to combo and win in this deck. But now as this episode is coming to a close, I would love to hear your thoughts on this deck. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts are on my new Mad Lad deck. And while you're at it, let me know what you think it should be called. Should it be More Fun Monuments or More Fun Tribalists or something else? And of course, as always, thanks again and have a good one.